My name is Corey Lawrence. I'm coming to you live here at WeWork in downtown Washington, D.C. They are our co-work sponsor for the week. I'm really excited to have our headquarters here at WeWork. I am one of the organizers of DC Startup Week and also the founder of IRL Agency. Thank you for joining us. And this DC Startup Week is a 5-day conference every September that's focused on building the startup community. We want to give a quick shout out to our title sponsors, Next, Insperity, WIS, and Technology Rivers. If you have any questions throughout the talk, please put in all caps question at the start of your chat so we can make sure not to miss any of your fantastic questions. We are so excited to have Alexi new to speak on Put Your Best Brand Forward, Defining Your Brand, Motivating with Messaging at DC Startup Week. Alexi leverages multifaceted expertise in brand development, creative marketing, media relations, and events management to deliver incisive solutions for her noted clients. Please join me in welcoming Alexi New to the DC Startup Week stage.
Thank you so much, Corey. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Alexi, as you all know now. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a founder and a partner at Noted, a branding consultancy based in DuPont Circle. I couldn't be more excited to speak with you all today, and we're going to run through some of the basics of branding and give you an overview on everything from naming to messaging. And then we're also going to talk through some case studies and show you some examples of Noted work. So the idea here is for you to apply some of these principles in your own life to your own brand, and then also see how we've done it, see how our process works. So without further ado, we'll get started. This is the Noted team. Sarah, Leah, and I founded our company 2.5 years ago. We're a branding consultancy that clarifies ideas, builds smart strategies, and crafts compelling copy. And you can see that we have a knack for alliteration. We've worked with all types of clients, so they run the gamut from solo entrepreneurs to small business owners to larger development firms that are branding neighborhoods and mixed-use properties. And it's a really fun line of work. We've done everything from naming to tagline development to brochure and collateral development. We're located by the Hyrick House Museum. So we're in Brewmaster Studios, and we're adjacent to this museum that honors one of DC's first brewers. And so our business carries on his entrepreneurial legacy, and we're surrounded by a lot of other creative business owners. And that makes me really proud to be a part of DC Startup Week, where we're surrounded by so many of you. I know even though we're virtual this year, we're still connected, which is amazing. So we'll start off with some brand history, and we'll round the wheel here. So branding actually comes from the Old Norse word brander, meaning fire. And a long time ago, ranchers claimed cattle, ancient Roman glassmakers branded their works, and medieval guilds made proprietary marks mandatory. By the Industrial Revolution, mass production shifted from local vendors, prompting the use of trademarks and early forms of advertising in newspaper and in person. By the late 1800s, packaged goods prompted established identities or brand names of products to differentiate, so people would purchase brand names that they could trust. By the early 1900s, the rise of mass media introduced advertising via radio and then television. So corporations began to develop visual identities, logos, for themselves as well as their products. And by the 80s, brand is widely acknowledged to increase the financial value of a company and is quantified as brand equity. So thinking about the Apples of the world, Starbucks, these really iconic brands, just their identities have value, and that's brand equity. Moving on to brand defined. So no presentation would be complete without a definition slide, summing it all up. But brand is squishy, and it's a little bit challenging to quantify it, as you'll see from these quotes. David Ogilvy said, brand is the intangible sum of a product's attributes, its name, packaging, and price, its history, its reputation, and the way it's advertised. Marty Neumeier said, a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or company. When enough individuals arrive at the same gut feeling, a company can be said to have a brand. And finally, marketing expert Seth Godin in 2009 said, a brand is the set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that taken together account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. If the consumer doesn't pay a premium, make a selection, or spread the word, then no brand value exists for that consumer. So thinking about this range of definitions, like I said, branding is squishy and its meaning has evolved over time from really being specific to product to evolving to be about our relationship and our perception of an entity, how consumers feel about that entity. And so our work is really about shaping that feeling and making that feeling really positive. Moving on to brand building blocks. I feel like this slide is a great representation of how multifaceted brand really is. So it's not just one component. A lot of people think, oh, a brand is a logo. That's not the only part of branding. There are many different facets of it. So first, thinking about who are we? What is your vision as a company? What are you hoping to achieve? Your mission, your purpose, your values, your core beliefs, your personality. So thinking about the human characteristics you want your brand to take on. Then moving on to what do we do for others? What products do we offer? Is there a tangible good that we're providing? What offerings, which might extend beyond the tangible? Are there processes involved? Are you streamlining a process for a consumer in a way that creates value? And culture is a really interesting one in that it extends both internally and externally. Culture can draw people to an organization internally as hires, or it can attract people to purchase from that. So I'm thinking of organizations that are really strong in terms of their social impact. That's really appealing to consumers and incentivizes them to buy into that brand. Then moving on to how is it communicated? So thinking through voice, how you're projecting about your brand, what attributes your brand voice has, naming, the name and identity it has, messaging, so thinking through how you're portraying in key messages and in external facing content what your brand is all about, and taglines, which are more succinct. And finally, how is it visualized? So imagery, are you going with an array of stock photography? Are you going with authentic in-person photography? One example that comes to mind for me that is an interesting way that a brand uses photography is thinking about Glossier and their use of authentic imagery and people using their products in a natural environment. Color, so thinking about a warm or a cool color palette. Logo, which is one of the more standard understandings of brand, so summing it up in one iconic identity piece. And typography, so font selection, serif or sans serif font. Are you going with something modern? Are you going with something classic? That's a way to define your brand. And touch points, thinking through the various ways that you're engaging with a customer, brochures, campaigns. There are a lot of different ways to connect. So at Noted, we translate who we are and what we offer into these external facing elements, these communication tools, and the visuals that attract people to a brand. And today we're going to focus in on communication tools. While I could go on at length about all of the aspects of brand, we're trying to keep this to an hour, so we'll stick with the narrative piece. So our approach is to make sense of all of these puzzle pieces. We're helping our clients gain clarity and understand from all of these different aspects of their business, what are the key ideas? And these are the brand pillars, the foundational principles that drive a brand. We established 3 pillars, and we use that to guide all of our communication moving forward. And I'm going to ask you all to develop your own pillars, and I'm not going to ask you to do this overnight, because this is typically a process that we spend weeks on and work with our clients on at length, but I want to get the wheels turning for you all and ask some different questions to help you unlock what the pillars of your brand are. So the first one, what are your company's strengths? Thinking about these 4 pieces here, products, processes, offerings, and culture. Is there something that jumps out there? Do you have a really fantastic product that's superior and beats all the competition? Have you streamlined a process? Thinking through those pieces, these are good questions to ask yourself to start to develop what your pillars could be. Next, what are my brand's values? This is another exercise we walk our clients through. And we've included some sample responses here, from sustainability to simplicity to efficiency. We've banned honesty, integrity, and respect, as we feel they're table stakes and we want you to think a little bit harder about what sets your brand apart. Next up, what is my brand's personality? Question number 3. And we've provided some more sample responses. Are you whimsical? Are you worldly? Thinking about creating a worldly brand, maybe you'll focus on cross-cultural perspectives in some of your messaging. There are different ways that personality can then transcend the many facets of brand. So, what are the 3 core ideas that underpin your brand? We've given you a couple thought starters here to start to figure that out. And your pillars should adhere to these guidelines. They should play up your strengths, but this isn't a SWOT analysis. Reflect your brand's personality and values. This is an important one. They should be evergreen. So oftentimes we'll walk our clients through this process and they'll think of pretty granular items that differentiate their brand that day, that year. But we want these pillars to live on and to stand the test of time. So they should speak to the concept at a high level. Putting this all in context for you, we provided a sample approach here with a nail salon. So for this client, 3 pillars stand out. Mindful approach was the first, thinking about an environment that is soothing, where professionals are attentive and the guest experience is top of mind. This is a differentiator for many nail salons, and thinking through what sets it apart, this really stood out. Next, we have spotless service. So this is everything from having a pristine environment, which now we know is so crucial, to having spotless services in terms of manicures that are perfect and won't chip, won't fade. Those are a really important component of this nail salon experience. And finally, on-trend appeal. Having contemporary design and cutting-edge products, the nail salon attracts a discerning customer base. So these 3 foundational ideas help guide the direction for this brand, help guide all of the messaging and writing, and provide focus that's really crucial in thinking about how you're going to market it and message it. Moving on to brand voice. Let's think about what tone your brand uses to communicate. And we've again included a word bank here, which is just full of thought starters, so maybe you'll pick a word of your own. But, you know, is your brand lighthearted? Is it warm, approachable, or more formal? And when you're thinking through these different pieces, it's really crucial to think about, who is your target audience? Are they more serious? Are they going to respond to something better that has a more formal approach? Or do they want something that's a little bit more relatable and down to earth? You want to think about them, but you also want to think about you and what's authentic to your business and your offering. So you're trying to bridge that gap. And thinking about this with the nail salon example, we identified these 3 voice words that guide all of the messaging. The first is polished, because we love a good pun at noted. So reinforcing this seamless experience, communicating with poise and professionalism. The second is fresh. So thinking through how to make this messaging savvy and convey that it's a modern salon, it's relevant to today's audience. And finally, confident, being sophisticated, self-assured, and really owning that they know what's up. Once you've decided on those different voice guidelines and have that framework of pillars and voice, it's time to think through a name. And this is one of my personal favorite parts of the process at Noted. So how should you select a name? I know that some of you may already have one, some of you may be brainstorming, and I'll tell you a little bit about our process. First, it's important to brainstorm a wide range of options. So think through the world of possibilities. I find it's really helpful to brainstorm without any restrictions, because sometimes the silliest name may be the best one in the end. Then it's time to narrow down the list. Consult the pillars, the voice words that you just developed. Think about any other criteria that you have for your name that you need to hold it up against, and filter from there. You may start with 100 names and narrow down to a few dozen. After that, you're going to vet usability and think through, is there a URL that's available that works for this offering? Another concern is trademarks and legal viability. And while we always do a quick search in the US Trademark Electronic Search System, what a mouthful, we always recommend that you consult a trademark attorney, especially if that's something that you're going to market pretty broadly. If you have a wide audience, it's important to go through that process. And finally, make a choice and stick with it. Naming is important, but we find that naming by committee isn't always the best approach. It's important to identify your key stakeholders upfront and make sure that they're folks you trust and you can run a few final options by. But it's possible to stall if you have too many people involved in this process. So know when to cap it and when to move forward. Here we've got some fun options for that nail salon example. Everything from enamored, a play on enamel, to left-right, speaking to that mindful approach and that really positive experience, the focus on spotless service, being left-right, being treated really well. Pedestal, trim and proper, lacquerish, handstand. You can see that we love a playful option, but these are also really aligned with the pillars and the voice words we developed. On point is an option that really speaks to the precision of the experience. So we'll come back to the naming in a moment, but now it's time to write your brand narrative and tagline. And let's think through what you're saying to the world. When you think about the messaging you want to project, it's important to capture your defining attributes. Stay true to your brand voice, so think about those 3 words you developed, and oftentimes we'll work with our clients to develop guidelines that follow from those words. So thinking about that word polished, what does that mean in practice? We're probably not going to post an Instagram with 100 exclamation points after it. Thinking through fresh, you'll want to think through vocabulary that conveys contemporary appeal. And finally, tailor your message to your medium. What you're going to post on Instagram may be different than what you're putting on Facebook or LinkedIn, and you have to think about where you're connecting with which members of your audience. So you may want to vary things up a little bit. So again, putting this in context and thinking through the narrative for our nail salon, which we've named On Point, shape up your spa day at On Point, a modern haven for natural nail care. Our space is your sanctuary, a refined, restorative atmosphere, complete with curated color collections, plush seating, and a soothing playlist. Experts in their craft, our trusted technicians are committed to delivering a consistently perfect polish in a spotless setting. For on the mark of the moment salon services, get On Point. And we've developed some taglines here as well, from a sharper salon experience to we have it all on hand, on the mark, off the charts, playing off of the on in the name, a spot on salon, speaking to that idea of precision. So here you're seeing how we go through that brand building process, how narrowing down the funnel and identifying those important ideas up front help us arrive at a narrative that feels on point. And I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions. Corey, I think you may be monitoring the chat box. Not sure if we have any questions.
The one question we have so far is asking if you can share your slides after the presentation. Are you going to be giving away like contact information people could use to reach out?
Certainly. Yep.
Amazing.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we can dive right into the case studies and move on ahead. So I'm sharing with you today 3 case studies on how we put this approach into practice at Noted. And the first case study is for Fountain Analytics, which is a data aggregation platform for healthcare providers, which couldn't be more relevant now. So this tool aggregates all of these reviews of different doctors and helps them understand how they're performing on different metrics. It's available to both individual doctors as well as larger healthcare organizations. And this team came to us because they have a really complex product and they wanted to share it with doctors and also with larger enterprise organizations and figure out how to convey what they were doing at a really complex level in a really clear and concise way. So we went through this exercise of helping figure out what are these brand pillars and we landed on these three. The first, sound methodology. This is a research-backed company that is relying on really intense methodologies. And they're providing a comprehensive picture of patient experience, identifying the attributes that matter most to patients and isolating the aspects of patient experience that matter most to users. The data is reliable. It's powered by sophisticated natural language processing technology, and it consolidates and analyzes patient feedback from hundreds of sources. So this is distilling a ton of information into really understandable, simple sound bites. And finally, applicable insights. And this piece is really key. So this solution helps providers who are time crunched understand what they need to perform better on, and it helps organizations make the most of their time by getting quick metrics. So we were able to walk this client through this process and say, hey, these are three core elements to your brand that make you stand out, that you should be messaging and focusing any marketing on in terms of speaking to your audience. Thinking through brand voice, we created a little diagram here. So there are a few shared attributes here for both the subscriber audience and the enterprise audience. Both voice words across the spectrum are astute, so speaking authoritatively about these solutions, and insightful, providing value in the writing. But for the subscribers, the voice is slightly different in that it's a little bit more familiar, so speaking one-to-one to individual care providers. For the enterprise audience, they're looking for something that's a little bit more practical. Managing these massive healthcare organizations, we want to speak to these larger organizations with a different point of view. So we're powering up the voice a bit for that audience. And we landed on messaging that succinctly captures the value. So perfect your PX, this idea of instant insight into patient experience, which couldn't be more important than at the present moment. We also developed the message, see how you stack up. This is really important both for individual doctors as well as for these larger enterprise organizations that want to see how they're doing. So we wanted to play up these key messages, and we got there from going through that pillar exercise. Next up, this is a solo entrepreneur and a friend of ours who we worked with as she was launching an interior design consulting business. And so for this brand, while some brands are focused more on separating the individual from the brand itself, this was really about embracing the owner's personality and the assets that she brought to the table. So she has an intuitive approach. She had worked in project management for years, and that really lends itself well to providing a seamless experience for people seeking interior styling. She has a vivacious spirit, and so that was another piece that we wanted to play up in the brand. She's lively and lighthearted, and she's engaging. And finally, cosmopolitan perspective. This client was an Italian-born Polish American. She had a cultured worldview, and she wanted that to be brought to the forefront with her brand. In thinking through her brand voice, we wanted to capture her enthusiasm, her energy, passion, and positivity, which are often key factors that make people want to work with somebody when they're thinking about redoing their home. She's thoughtful, and we wanted that to come through in the voice as well, bringing forward service-focused content and warm personal stories that created that customer connection. And her voice is informative, so it's not just fluff. That was something that we talked about when we were auditing all of the different designers and Instagram accounts out there. We wanted her to add real value, delivering insights and tips and things that her customers could walk away with and feel added value to their lives. Naming this project was a really fun one. We had a couple naming directions that stemmed from those initial pillars and pieces we talked through. So we had a few Polish options, Roślina and Leko. We liked the sound of them and they had important meaning. And we liked this personal and polished direction as an alternative, which we're playing up her name. Ultimately, we landed on ID by ZM, and we feel like this really captures the point of view of the brand, showcasing the designer's initials, as well as this idea of her own perspective infused into this approach that she brings. And this was our messaging, our brand narrative that we developed. So we brought through a lot of these elements and that we had established early on in the process. So personalized home styling services. Her Polish roots inform her simple, modern aesthetic, incorporating European influences and unexpected details to enrich and enliven spaces. And we brought in her project management expertise, which enables her to be even more successful in this design role. Our final case study is for a client who is launching 2 sibling brands. One was an HR consultancy, and one is an HR certification training program. And the interesting challenge with this project was creating a relationship between these 2 brands where they shared pillars and they had the same overarching umbrella values, yet they were able to be individual brands as well and live separate from each other because they serve different purposes. So we developed these 3 core ideas for the brand pillars. The first is in it together. We wanted to speak to our client's appreciative approach. This was something he emphasized at length about his HR consulting tack. It was collaborative and community-oriented. Realizing potential is about equipping companies with strategies and insights for continuous corporate growth and helping individuals on the path to certification success. And raising the bar is about bringing a fresh perspective to a conventionally stale industry, being on the forefront of innovation. Again, we have a handy-dandy voice chart here. We wanted to channel the pragmatically positive voice that our client brought to the table. So we arrived at this voice word because it's really a blend here. It's not just default positivity or overly saccharine sweetness. It's about being real, but putting a good spin on it, making clients feel happy about the relationship even when there's hard news to deliver. And that also relates to energetically empowering, which is about inspiring employers to make meaningful organizational change and motivating students to master course material and excel in their careers. On the consulting side of things, the voice needed to be balanced. We landed on this word because we felt it was important to claim tonal middle ground. So being able to adapt to different clients' ways of speaking greater embeds itself in with these outside companies, and that was important. And for certification training brand, we wanted greater to be straightforward, clear, and simple. We've got another naming exercise here, which showcases the relationship between greater human capital and the greater certification training brand. So we came up with a number of different options that played out from those pillars. Greater HR Pro, which speaks to a professional edge and the professionals who would be taking on the certification training course. Homeroom, a more playful option. Career Boost, speaking to that idea of ascension, and a number of other options that were in the same vein. The ultimate winner was Greater HR Pro, fully launching soon. And this was our messaging and our narrative that we developed for Greater Human Capital, the HR consulting brand. This is about being a people-first HR partner. That phrase really stuck out to us and to our client, and that's something that we wanted to showcase and put forth in the messaging, that this is about treating people as individuals and celebrating strengths. We use the phrase boutique team to speak to this nimble approach. Customizing success strategies really plays into that idea of balancing and maximizing potential and minimizing turbulence. We ultimately landed on this tagline, greater results are within reach, which we loved. We felt it was the appropriate use of a play on the name and spoke to the idea of possibility, the positivity that our client brought to the table. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all for questions. And if you don't have any, I have a few lessons in my back pocket and things that I've learned along the way on the startup journey. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have some questions in the chat. One from Crystal. She's asked, when we figure out our pillars, is this something that we have on our website?
That is a great question, and it's one we get a lot from our clients. Pillars are actually internal, so they should be something that guides your team and they can be shared with internal partners as opposed to shared externally. There may be a way to reflect them in an external sense, but they're really about gaining alignment with your team and helping you clarify your point of view before you take that to market.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. Madison has a question. How about choosing fonts? She says, I'm looking to create my branding image, but I feel like I can never find a font that looks unique and fits my messaging.
Yeah, that's a great question for sure. I think it's definitely a very personal process. And so, Madison, I'd love to talk more with you about that, and definitely connect with me after the fact and reach out at Alexi@notedbranding.com. I think it's something that really requires you to go through that exercise of thinking through your pillars, your voice, and establishing those key traits up front so that you have some criteria when you're searching for a font. If you're going for a more modern look, if you want to position your brand in that way, or if you know if you want to be more playful. Addressing some of those questions up front, I think will hopefully make that process easier and narrow down the mix of options.
Great, thank you. Anna has a question. She says, what would your advice be for someone who is looking to start up a business that had a product as one channel and a service as the other?
That's a great question. I think it would be important to think through what is unifying in the overarching company brand, and then also what you need to differentiate. So it sounds like a similar situation to some of our clients where they have two different product lines, or we're marketing to two different audiences. So I think you would probably want to establish pillars that unified the two, and then figure out what the differences in audience were and how to adapt, how to tailor your voice, how to tailor the messaging to reach those different people and speak to the product's differences as well, making sure that you're clearly conveying, this is a product, this is a service.
Absolutely. Leon is asking, how do you avoid potential violation of DC's particular stringent Human Rights Act with respect to the written message?
That is a good one, and one I would have to look into further. So I would recommend you email me and I will look into that. I don't have an upfront answer for you on that one.
Thank you. I'm going to set it where people can unmute themselves if they would like.
Absolutely. Here, I'm going to
unmute and ask any questions that you have for Alexi. We have another question. How would you validate that your voice messaging naming is resonating with your audience? That's a great question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's something where you would want to test it out on your market and target audience and see how things are going, and perhaps identify some surveys or strategic channels to evaluate that. It's also something where I think you could vet that with your target audience within a smaller group. So like we talked about with naming, identify a few folks in your target audience segment that you could run things by and see how it's landing with them. You don't necessarily want to take everything out to the market right away. It's important to have a really strategic plan. And we're all about that instinctive, intuitive upfront stuff, but we know it has to be backed by data and research and a strategic brand launch. So I think identifying those key stakeholders up front and figuring out who you can run your ideas by, who fits your target audience up front, is a good move.
Alexia, I have another kind of follow-up question to that as well. What are your thoughts on, I feel like branding is such an intuitive thing to you as a business, to you as a business owner, to kind of your story. So what are your thoughts when it comes to validating? Would you ever change the audience that you're targeting based off of the brand that you create, or would you normally change the brand that you've created depending on what audience you're looking at?
That's a great question. I think that, as your audience evolves, you may have to adapt your brand. So while I mentioned that the pillars are evergreen, there are shifts like this in the market, like COVID, that warrant a total reevaluation. And so I wouldn't put any disclaimers on your brand having to live forever. If you notice an audience that you can reach and you have the capacity to do it, then you might want to make alterations to your brand strategically. And that's something that I'd advise looking into.
Absolutely. We have a question from Justin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, nice to see you. So we have created a brand called Equality Rewards, and we connect businesses with $1 trillion LGBTQ market through data analytics and storytelling. And it emerged out of a 6-year LGBTQ media and marketing company. We are concerned that our messaging to the business side of our two-sided coin of customers and users will be more tailored to sound investor-like and very business-like, whereas we also want to have a message to consumers that, as you mentioned, is more personal and allows them to see that we care about their individual needs and personal values so they can identify businesses that are authentically inclusive. How would you go about almost creating two separate taglines, if that's indeed the case we need to do when communicating with different audiences?
That's a great question, and definitely a worthwhile, a dilemma to consider. But I think that you can absolutely come up with multiple taglines to approach different audiences. And I think it would be a good idea to identify a few key stakeholders in each group, like an initial pilot group to test ideas on. But I think it's absolutely warranted that you would want to approach those people in different ways, and you might have a totally different outreach campaign to the business side than to the individuals. And perhaps the cadence is different. Perhaps for individuals, you're speaking to them more often. I think you would want to completely develop targeted campaigns for each of those audiences, but under that umbrella of whatever your foundational ideals are. So happy to chat more about it after the fact, but you have to identify those grounding principles, and then maybe the outreach strategy is different, and there are two ways of conveying that message that each reach those respective audiences.
The biggest concern is that there's one website, and we want to make sure that we are able to grow users without making our business potential clients look at it and say, oh, this isn't fitting what I'm looking for.
Absolutely. So we've had a few clients that are dealing with similar concerns there, and I think if you can identify in the user experience if there are ways to factor that in. So maybe creating one page, a subpage for businesses that you're targeting and another one for individuals so that they're getting different landing messaging that's particular to their use case. I think that would be helpful.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
We have a couple more questions that came in. Elizabeth is asking, can you talk more about the research process in regards to branding, audience, and message testing? What is your advice for keeping your brand current?
That's a great question. So as Justin mentioned, actually in his question earlier, I think a lot of it is about instinct, or we were talking about that before, this idea of intuition and knowing what works. And I think it's a combination of art and science, right? And so I won't claim that we have the science all figured out. I think it's important to identify some key folks in your target audience group, like we mentioned, a key group of stakeholders that you're going to vet that initial message with and run it by them. And then there are definitely products and processes and types of companies that warrant a broader research effort. So sometimes we'll partner with research firms, or our clients will want us to do different focus groups and stakeholder surveys. And that's something that case by case can make sense if you want to take that on. I think if you're also getting customer feedback, just having a customer feedback mechanism where your customers are telling you, hey, this is working for me or it's not, you will know that from your feedback tool. If you have something that's in place and people are saying, hey, this is out of date, or an email message didn't land, then you're getting a clue that, hey, you might want to go through a rebranding exercise.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat, and I think we have enough time for maybe one or two more questions after this one. Crystal's asking, after branding your company and launching your business, if you are writing a blog, should it only be geared toward your brand?
So I would say your blog can cover a diverse range of topics, and it should. And that's something that we talk about with our clients often. We don't actually go through the process of writing those blog posts, but we work with our clients to help them develop content buckets so that they can draw from different things. Because I think if you're only writing about your brand and your brand development, then that may get stale. So you have to identify, how does your brand extend to different facets of operations, or what are different content buckets you can speak to that your audience will be interested in. And it really is dependent on what business line you're in and what types of things your target audience likes. but I think it's good to encompass a broad array of topics. That at the same time, you don't want to veer off topic to something that feels way out of your wheelhouse or that you can't comment authentically on, but I think it's good to diversify.
Absolutely. Any additional questions for Alexi?
Thank you all so much. Great questions, really wonderful answers. And if I didn't answer something, or if you have something that arises, feel free to email us at hello@notedbranding.com to get the full team, or me at alexi@notedbranding.com.
For sure. Alexia, I put your email in the chat earlier, but do you mind putting your email in the chat as well now again?
Yep, sure thing.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We would love if you could go back into Attendify and put any insights that you learned from this event into the Attendify activity stream to share with all of our other attendees. And we have some other really fantastic events coming up just in 14 minutes from now. We've got how to build successful processes and people in remote workplaces. As part of our culture track, which is new this year, really excited for that. We also have a conversation on crowdfunding and Be Seen, telling your story to the media with Be Seen, the PR company here in DC. And since we're on a marketing call, that might pertain to a lot of the people here. So feel free to go back into Attendify and introduce yourself, share any of the insights that you had, and can't wait to see you guys on the next panels. Thank you, Lexi.
Everyone, it was a pleasure. Talk to you all soon. Hope to hear from you.
Thank you.